everyone, I'm Mark DeGrasse with the In the Garage podcast with CarParts.com, and I'm here with Michael Chang. We're talking how to buy a car and not make a bunch of dumb mistakes that newbies do when they buy a car that has a bunch of issues or situations that you could have easily avoided, even if you're not a mechanic. So, Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Now, I know we talked about you having a few imports, a bunch of different types of cars over the years. I'm sure you have a few tips for, people to find a car, not just a car that they're going to, not be broken all the time, but actually will enjoy. Now, you started with RX-7, you were saying?
Yes, I started with an 18 RX-7 that I found on Craigslist,
Nice.
years and years ago, and I paid $500 for it.
Nice.
I didn't know, you're supposed to take it somewhere, get a compression test, have it looked over. So I forked over $500 and there goes my first car.
There you go.
My first car ever, manual transmission. I learned how to drive manual transmission on that car. And 3 months later, it broke.
Now, that break that happened, could that have been avoided if you had checked anything out, or was it just a $500 car is going to have issues?
The engine blew up.
Oh, the engine blew up.
So,
Okay,
that could have been noticed if I just had a compression test done.
Okay, so just the first tip you would say is if you do find a car that looks pretty good, or maybe just a car that's too good to be true, because I mean that sounds like a sweet deal, even in '89 to get an RX-7 for $500.
Right.
So was it? What was the issue? How did it blow up?
Well, it's your typical rotary problem.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but I would say that if you are buying your first car, you're 16, you're 17, you're buying a first car, you save money. You should really, at this moment this time that we're in, there are so many places you could look. There are Facebook groups on every single car there is out there. I've seen Facebook groups of just talking about a particular car, a model, and all the issues that they have. So there is plenty of research to be done. You may have a dream car. You may find a really good deal for your dream car. Don't get it. Let it go over your head. Calm down. Take a look at the issues, how much it will possibly cost to fix, and just do your research. There are so many different places you could do research now on a car that, it amazes me how much information is out there.
Well, I think but the deal is so enticing, because I think what happens is you kind of fall in love with the car and you're like, oh my gosh, it's the perfect deal. It's what I've always wanted. And here it is. And this person's selling it for almost nothing. Would you say, let's say that you can't find somebody to do the compression test. Do you have a list of items that you would say, okay, here's the things that you should check bare minimum to make sure that the car is not going to blow up in 3 months?
Sure. I mean, if you're buying a new to you car, a pre-owned car, the easiest thing to check for if you're not mechanically inclined would be just to open that oil cap, take a look on the underside of the oil cap, and see if you see a milky residue. Milky residue means that there's coolant leaked and it got mixed into your oil. And a lot of times that just means the car has a blown head gasket. So immediately you're going to be at least a few $1,000s into that car after buying the car.
Yes. Well, and that's a huge decision. I mean, a couple $1,000s on top of whatever you just paid for it these days is way too much money, and all of us just can't afford that. My wife, she actually had a car. I can't remember what was that? Touareg. That's what it was, and they had put water in the radiator instead of antifreeze. And so what happened was when we went up to Yosemite or whatever, it froze and then it just cracked, and that was it. We had to drive back from Mammoth to Southern California going, I think, 25 miles an hour, and then stopping every so often to pour more into the radiator. Oh, that was a nightmare. But like you said, there's just a few things you could do. I also had some experience where a friend of mine would go to police auctions, and then we'd, go through a checklist just to check. I mean, but we still ended up with a car that had an air conditioning, unit that didn't work.
That was the other thing. Like, you find your first car, you're excited, that's what you want. You should have a checklist. You should know what features the car has. You look at those features, and you make sure they all work. You make sure your turn signals work. You make sure your headlights work, tail lights work, brake lights work. All those very basic things. Then you make sure to see it. Does the sunroof open if it has one? Does it close? Does do all my windows work? Does the AC work? All those things you need to at least flick on the switch and go, hey, does this work?
No, and it sounds almost too easy, but it is really just that easy. Just go through and check all the things because those will add up too. Because you can say, oh well, that Windows, it's going down a little funny, but whatever, it'll be fine. But that's just one of the kind of dangers that you have when buying a car. I know with imports especially, because I used to be like, oh my gosh, this guy already did all the work. It has the cold air intake and it has all these different features, but that car was probably raced somewhere.
To get into that, I actually have a story. I found this car that I really wanted. It was an 06 Elise.
Nice.
This was 2009. I was getting out of my RX-8, and I just needed, I was young at the time. I needed another sports car, so to speak. And I found this great deal on a Lotus Elise that had 3,000 miles on it out of Arizona. Wow. And the guy only wanted like $27,000. A 3-year-old Elise was going for at least $40,000 at the time. I flew out to Arizona. I looked at the car. I test drove it. And I said, here's a cashier's check for $27,000. Thank you very much. Sign the title over. And I drove home. On the way home, I think it was third going into fourth, there was grinding. I didn't take it up to fourth on my test drive. It was somebody else's car. I wasn't going to drive like crazy. Yeah. And I ignored it. I thought, well, maybe it just needs a new clutch or a synchros or whatever it needs. Yeah. Not a big deal. And I chose to continue to ignore it until one day it just wouldn't go into gear. I'm like, what's going on here? And that was at the beginning stages of car forums online. And, I don't think Facebook was very big back then. There certainly wasn't any Facebook groups. So I did a little bit more digging. Turned out the guy that I bought the car from, those 3,000 miles that he had on the car were all track miles. And he didn't maintain the car.
He just
hey, this thing started grinding. I'm going to go get it checked out. Apparently, he needed a new transmission. So he dumped it on me.
Download the CarParts.com app and accelerate convenience with access to over 850,000 auto parts at your fingertips. We make it easier to find the parts you need, anytime, anywhere. Get it now on the Apple App Store and Google Play. J.C. Whitney is back. The original auto parts catalog, a garage staple and cultural cornerstone for over 100 years, is now a magazine. Whether you're a newcomer or a longtime gearhead, J.C. Whitney instills confidence by delivering expertly curated auto parts and a gateway to engaging community experiences, entertainment, resources, and inspiration. Learn more about the new J.C. Whitney at jcwhitney.com.
And I chose to ignore all the signs because it was a car that I really wanted.
Yeah, you're in love with it.
Yeah, I was in love with it. It was such a good deal. I didn't want to believe that anything could go wrong within those 3,000 miles.
Oh, that's brutal. Yeah, but I mean, how much was the transition? Did it even out once you fixed it?
No, I told one of my buddies, hey, this car is a broken transmission. You want to buy it for like 20 grand? And I dumped it on him.
Oh, okay.
After telling him that the transmission is broken, yeah.
Well, you disclosed it.
Yeah, I disclosed it.
Yeah. Well, no, that's, I had a similar story, but it actually worked out well. I found a G35, 2005. I think it must have been like 3-4 years old. Mm-hmm. And I got it for $25,000. And at the time, I think it was worth like $37,000. Actually, I took it to the bank afterwards and said, hey, I just want to take it a loan because I bought it cash. And they're like, oh yeah, it's $37,000. How much do you want? And I was like, oh, this is dangerous. All of it. No, I took some, but it is possible to find those deals. But like you're saying, if you just do the basic checklist, would you say now, do you take cars all the way through all gears when you test drive?
I have 3 kids now and a wife, so, I don't really buy manual transmission anymore.
You don't buy Lotus Elise anymore?
No, I don't fit into it anymore.
Well, getting more practical, that makes sense. But I mean, just doing that though would have helped. And I think if you do a manual transmission, I think that'd be an easy step.
If I would just roll through all the gears.
Just go through all the gears. Not a big deal. It takes a few minutes. And honestly, somebody selling their car, I always expect everybody to do everything, right? Like, yeah, test everything, mess around with it. But yeah, a lot of people are either polite or they think it's unnecessary to check those things. But it all adds up. Not just the big things, but just the little things add up, paint issues, stuff like that. So,
And, talk about paint issues. My then girlfriend, now wife, she had, this is before we started dating, she had bought a 2006 Sequoia that was repoed.
Oh.
So she had bought the car after somebody else bought it. Within 3 months, they didn't make 3 payments.
Oh.
Bank came and got it. Dealership took a hold of it and sold it to her. We were, seeing each other casually. It wasn't a serious thing yet. So she buys the car, and then she tells me, I told her, you should have called me. I used to detail cars, in college to pay for stuff. So I had a paint thickness gauge. She tells me she buys this car as 3 months. So I'm like, well, let me just, test it. Everything came out pretty normal, except the driver's side door was measuring something like 250 microns. To give you a baseline idea, your regular Japanese import will usually measure between 90 to 120 microns.
Okay.
Lexus maybe a little thicker. Your nicer luxury models maybe a little thicker. Your typical German import will measure 150, 160, maybe a little higher. And your hand-built cars, the really expensive ones, they'll measure much higher because it's hand-painted. But, with that said, like, you imagine you're in a factory setting, there's a robotic arm that's painting your car. It's a very, very fine gun that they use, a spray head that they use. So 90 to 120 micron is typical. 250 micron driver's side door tells me that the door's been repaired and repainted.
Oof.
Now, on top of that, they somehow swindled her into paying like $3,000 over MSRP.
Just because?
Just because. Yeah.
It wasn't warranty for a million years or something.
They probably took advantage of her because they saw that it was a girl that doesn't know anything about cars. She somehow bought all these things that I'm like, you don't need that. There was like a low jack that she didn't. Who is going to go out and steal a Sequoia in 2009 or 2006, whatever it was? So that's that. But paint thickness gauge is something I would tell people to always invest in one. Only because there are folks out there who getting a car accident, it's a minor accident or whatever it is, they pay cash for the repair. It doesn't go on Carfax.
Yes.
You could find paint thickness gauge on Amazon, $50, $100, $150. Okay. And it will tell you on all of the metal surfaces. So it won't tell you like if the plastic bumper is being repainted. But you could go over a baseline, your Japanese cars are 90 to 120. If you start seeing 200, 300, it's definitely be repainted, and, it would be wise to at least pay a guy to come out and take a look, with a PPI. If you don't know anybody that's mechanical inclined, go to a mechanical shop, go to a body shop, tell them, hey, I need a PPI. How much do you charge? You decide if it's worth it. If you see things that's really off, body panels doesn't line up. A lot of times when something's been replaced, you need to take the bolts off, right? But when you use a tool to take the bolts off, it'll scratch the bolts. So you could literally just look at the bolts, on the hood, in the trunk, and see, has that been torqued? Multiple times maybe. Take it off, put it on. Take it off, put it on. Make sure everything fits right. So those are all very good telltale signs that you can look for. Next, I would say is look under the carpet. Does it smell? Does it have a musty smell? That could be a sign that the car was flooded. Do you see any mold after you pull up the carpets? That would also be a telltale sign of, the car was flooded at one point. Of course, Carfax is always good if the person that you're buying the car from or the dealership that you're buying the car from does not have service records. A lot of times on Carfax, it will actually show you basic service records. If it was done at a dealership or one of those lube places, it will say, at 30,000 miles, there was an oil change. Tires got rotated, so on and so forth. But with how many times I've been burned, I tend to look for pre-owned cars at a dealership where I could, hopefully pull service records, or I find a private party that at least keeps some of the service records.
No, that makes a ton of sense, and I think especially for those deals, because I think if it's a dealer, there's insurance with there, you could go find them. When you're buying from a private party, maybe it's a car you just saw on the side of the street that had a for sale sign on it.
Right.
That's the time when you need to go in, look for what you're talking about, those the bolts that have some damage to them, or the thickness of the paint. I think that's a huge tip, because a lot of times you could do a really, really good job with Bondo and a good painter, and it won't look like anything is wrong with whatever happened, and it could be a hole there or some massive issue that you don't want to have to deal with, or just indicates that this person's lying to you, and that could just be the the tip of the iceberg in terms of the problems that you're going to have with this car, because this person lied about that. So that's an enormous tip. Now, was the car okay, or was it just that the door had been replaced and they didn't mention it?
It looked like the door was replaced.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, whoever owned that car for the first 3 months of its life, probably somebody backed into them, or one way or the other, that door was replaced. It was repainted. Towards the end, when me and my wife was selling that car, that door's paint started cracking.
Oof.
Yeah.
Okay, so it wasn't even a good job.
So it wasn't even a very good job.
Oh, that's a bummer. Did you tell them at that point, the person who bought the car? That's the real test. Are you going to tell the next person about it?
We sold it to CarMax.
Oh,
so,
okay.
I mean, obviously,
Big
they saw it.
corporation, who cares?
Yeah. They saw the damage.
They saw the damage, okay. No, and they have an inspection. Actually, if you go to CarMax, I think I've bought and sold, I don't know, 10, 12 cars at CarMax. They'll just have you sit down. They'll go out and inspect. They have a clipboard. They'll go through a checklist, and they'll tell you exactly what it's worth based on that. And actually, a old used car dealer that I talked to when I was doing the auction stuff said, a good appraiser of cars should be able to look at your car and tell you the mileage of the car that they're looking at, just based on the aesthetics from the outside. And I was like, oh, wow, that's impressive.
You could, a lot of times, people that are more experienced, they can look at the wear on your steering wheel. They can look at your seats. They can look. They can jack up your car, look at underneath all your suspension components, and go, you say this car has 30,000 miles? No, I think it has 100,000 plus over.
Oh. Yeah,
because all those wear and tear items, whoever is selling you that car is probably not going to spend $5,000 getting all that stuff sorted.
No. Well, and if they're willing to do that in the first place,
they're probably keeping that car. They won't be selling it to you.
Yeah, well, and they're not going to spend a bunch of money in general, because they're trying to maximize what they're getting. And if they're offering it for a deal, then they're already losing that money from it, so they're not going to lose any more. But no, I think your tips are fantastic. I think they're very easy to do, super practical. You don't have to be a mechanic. All you have to do is look for these little telltale signs, and that would be a great checklist. So we'll probably talk in a little bit and come up with a checklist for finding your dream car and making sure it's not a nightmare. There you go. Just made up the name for it. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Michael. This has been a ton of fun. We'll have to have you back on soon. I'd love to talk about rotaries, kind of, how they work, why you like them. And hopefully when that new car comes out, you could get one, and we'll talk about if it's as good as your first car ever, the 89.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for listening. Tune in next time for more vehicle talk, as well as how to, find vehicles that you actually like and will enjoy into the future.